Hello all, welcome to the show. I'm Gus Gagliardi and this is Fire Code Tech. On Fire Code Tech, we interview fire protection professionals from all different careers and backgrounds in order to provide insight and a resource for those in the field. My goal is to help you become a more informed fire protection professional. Fire Code Tech has interviews with engineers and researchers, fire marshals, and insurance professionals, and highlights topics like codes and standards, engineering systems, professional development, and trending topics in the industry. So if you're someone who wants to know more about fire protection or the fascinating stories of those who are in the field, you're in the right place. Hello all. Welcome to episode 60 of Fire Code Tech. In this episode, we have John Caliri. John is a consulting engineer who works for SLS Consulting out of Atlanta, Georgia. John breaks down his expertise in code consulting, marketing, and performance-based design in this great interview. Tune into this episode if you want to hear about how to market fire protection and life safety services, how to solve engineering and construction industry problems with performance-based design, and overall just hear about somebody who is kicking butt in their career at an early age. As always, don't forget to subscribe and follow us on social media. Oh, and if you want to do me a huge favor, give me that 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Well, welcome to the podcast, John. Thanks for coming on Fire Code Tech.
Yeah, hey man, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, I like to get these shows started with telling the listener a little bit about how you found fire and life safety and a bit about your background.
Sure, absolutely. So, obviously, my name is John Caliri with SLS. How I found fire. So I went to WPI, grew up in Massachusetts, has a great reputation, up there, the school. So when I got in, it was a no-brainer that I was going there. I actually went for chemical engineering, was really interested in chemistry, processes, things like that, how they happened, big industrial facilities, things like that. But halfway through my sophomore year, I believe, I decided that I couldn't see myself in a chemistry lab for the rest of my life as a career. So I started looking for, alternate career paths, whether it was switching majors or it was looking into grad school. And WPI does this really cool thing. I'm not sure if they do it at the other schools, at Maryland or Cal Poly or some of the smaller ones, but to grow the fire protection program, you actually check a box on your application and they take your undergraduate application as admission to the program. So essentially you're in the program until you decide to back out or decide not to pursue it. And so I decided that was something I was going to look into a little further. I had checked that box as a freshman, so I was technically in the program. And then looking for internships my junior year, I decided to pursue a fire protection internship and see if I'd actually like that field, learn a little bit more about it. Figured if I didn't like the internship, then that was my answer. I wasn't going to go into fire life safety, and I was going to get out of the program. So I ended up interning at Nfpa for a summer in Quincy, Massachusetts, and fell in love with the profession. Felt like what we do really matters. Felt like it was a really fulfilling career path. And so from that point forward, I just decided to stay in the program and pursue a career in this field. And so far, it's been positive.
That's good, man. That's good to hear. When I get people who come from really accredited degrees like the one at WPI, I always like to ask them about, how the coursework, would you describe a bit about what of the coursework that you really enjoyed, or would you speak a little bit about the degree program at WPI?
Yeah, so WPI is a little bit interesting of a school. So we don't have an undergraduate fire protection program like a University of Maryland does. So everything, if you're doing fire protection, everything's graduate driven. But the undergraduate programs, obviously, it has all the major engineerings, right? Mechanical, chemical, civil, electrical, all that stuff. The undergraduate program is a little unique in the fact that we're super fast paced. So we have 7-week terms, 4 terms instead of 2 semesters. And they try to cram as much as they can into those terms. It's also very project based. So a lot of our classes have large projects where you're teamed up with other students and your performance is based on how well you perform as a team and your interaction with other members. It really gets you ready for the working environment where you might not know who you're working with within your company or another company or other project stakeholders, things like that. So that's the undergraduate portion. When you get to the graduate portion, it's really interesting. I think there's a lot of really, really smart and dedicated people in that program, from not only just the PhD side of things, people teaching things like explosion prevention and chemical fire protection and fire dynamics and things like that, where it's really scientific. Also, but there's a lot of emphasis put on real world application. I think some of the best classes I took were the building code and life safety code consulting class. We have a whole class on how to use those codes and how they work and how those are applied in the real world and how the two conflicting books kind of interact, right? The sprinkler design class is a lot more real world design application versus theoretical application, which is really helpful coming out of the program. But the thing that's really weird about it is they have put a huge emphasis on online learning, which I think is really important in today's day and age, where a lot of people are telecommuting to work or telecommuting to their degree or doing their degree online after class. And they understand that a lot of people kind of don't fall into the fire protection profession, but don't necessarily see it as a career path coming out of high school, right? So a lot of the people we went to school with were kids who we graduated with at WPI that continued on to the program, but also people who are already working and maybe were working in the fire protection field and decided to come back and get the degree to further their education and their understanding of the profession and enhance their careers. So we had a lot of online classes, not necessarily in-person lectures. A lot of things were done it was kind of on you to, really figure out how to manage your time, how to do what you have to do, whether you needed to go to school full time, whether you could work and do it at the same time. So it was really interesting, good learning experience for how to budget and manage your time in a professional environment, but also worked with people all over the country, right? I mean, we had project groups in those classes where, two kids might be actually at the school and one might be in Texas and one might be, working professionally in New York City. So you have to learn how to set meetings, be effective in meetings, be efficient in meetings, because these people have lives they have to get back to. They're not a full-time student like we were, like I was taking the classes, and really understand how that dynamic works. I think it really, really set us up well for actual work environment. I think it was a really good kind of litmus test as to whether or not you could function in that type of environment.
Yeah, that sounds like a really interesting and kind of different way to do school. It's cool to hear about. I wanted to ask you about your internship at NFPA, because the NFPA is such an institution in the industry and such a wealth of knowledge. Yeah, so speak a little bit about that experience and what could that kind of looked like.
Yeah, so as an intern, it was an awesome experience. A really great way to learn about the industry, meet a lot of influential people in the industry, make a lot of great connections. What they do is you come in as an engineering intern. They have a whole engineering department. I know they've kind of restructured a little bit to since I left to have that, or finished my internship, to have that engineering department, focus some of them on codes and standards and some of them on like outreach and education. But when I was there, it was all just one group. Everybody kind of did a little bit of everything. And so what they do is, we reported directly to Matt Klaus, who is still there, really, big name in the industry. He was an awesome guy to work for and taught us a lot. And he made sure that we not only learned about fire protection, but learned about NFPA as a whole and how that codes development process works. We got to shadow some of the staff liaisons for certain standards. We got to sit in on code development meetings every once in a while. So it was a really good introduction to, how these things are developed, kind of, seeing, if you will, I always use the analogy of like seeing behind the kitchen doors as to how the meal is made, and seeing how these codes are developed and understanding that it takes a village. It's not just one person writing these codes, which was something that, seems obvious now, but when I was entering the fire protection program at WPI, I had no idea how these things were made. So it was really cool to see that process and understand how it works, as well as just, like I said, learn as much as you can, soak up as much as you can about the industry, certain standards, understand what standards do what. They taught us everything from, what's the difference between a standard and a code, right? So it was a really good experience and a really good introduction to fire protection and seeing kind of where the industry can take you, and also I guess the backbone of the industry, because like you said, NFPA is such an institution. So it was a great learning experience for myself and the four other interns that were in my class.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Yeah, it's really great that you got to be a part of such a prolific program at WPI, and then there are so many of these kind of fire and life safety institutions that are all located in the eastern U.S. So that's kind of really like an epicenter for a lot of what happens for the codes and standards process in the U.S. So that's neat that you got to glimpse into that, and it sounds like you got a really big jump start on your career, because some of those concepts like codes and standards development, those are really dense and hard to pick up at an early point in your career. So that's cool that you got to have that experience.
Yeah, we were really lucky. It was a really great experience to have, and it certainly helped. As I transitioned to the consulting world and doing code consulting, understanding some of the basic stuff that they consider basic at NFPA, that's not necessarily basic in the industry in terms of scoping and things like that. That's our industry as fire protection professionals, we understand, but talking with our clients and others, stakeholders, it's nice to be able to have that base understanding from the source and be able to use that as a basis for explanation. So certainly very lucky and very appreciative of the time that we get to spend there.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's a great point to transition. So let's speak a little bit about some of the professional roles that you've held, and kind of what your work background looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out of school. I went to work for a company called Commercial Construction Consulting, C3, a large, mid-sized MEP firm in Boston, Massachusetts, that also has kind of a real estate development arm. And they had just developed a code group about, it had to be 3 or 4 years before I started, and they were looking for an entry level code consultant. So I did everything there. Started off doing mostly code research work in Boston, code reports, plan reviews, some accessibility code stuff. Kind of got a well-rounded introduction to the code world on top of what I had learned at NFPA. And then transitioned a little bit there into doing more engineering work, from fire protection system design, fire alarm system design, to smoke control system testing, actual functional testing in the field, to actually helping out their MEP commissioning team as just someone there to help run tests and kind of be a grunt and run around and pull levers as needed, but learn as much as I could about how buildings work, not just in the fire protection world, but in the MEP world, and understand how they interface. So that was a really valuable experience. Learned a lot hands-on wise. So I was super grateful for that, and was able to learn not only conceptually but visually, and actually see these things in the field. Then my wife and I moved from Massachusetts to Atlanta, which was a big jump for us, but it was a great personal move and a great professional move for us. I went to work for a company called Telgen Engineering Consulting, a larger design-heavy firm. Met a lot of great people there. Was able to train under Tracy Bellamy, who is a big name in the industry, always on the codes and standards boards and things like that. Was able to learn a lot more and refine some of my design tools, right? So code-wise, I had done a lot in Boston. Telgen was a lot more focused on the sprinkler and fire alarm aspect of things, which was an area that I had, like I'd said, in Boston, I'd done some of it, but an area that I was really weak. So it was a really nice opportunity to round out my skill set and learn how to do full sprinkler design from concept to construction documents, learn how to do full fire alarm design from concept to construction documents, and then, have the odd opportunity to learn things like, FDS fire modeling, and really apply some of the performance-based design stuff and some of the fire testing stuff they do for their bigger clients. So that was a great experience. Was there for about 2 years, I believe. And then I was approached by a contact I had made earlier in my career, Mike Sheehan, who started SLS Consulting in Miami in 2012. And he was looking to expand, looking to grow. We had really hit it off. We grew up in the same area of Massachusetts, so we had a connection there. And he had told me that, he was looking to work together and looking to start something up in a new city. And he wondered if I was interested in taking a stab at it. And now here we are 3 years later. I'm running the Atlanta office for SLS. We've grown pretty steadily over the last couple of years. We're doing everything from design work to performance-based design work to um, code consulting, accessibility code consulting, construction testing, smoke control, fire stopping, kind of the whole 9 yards. A general consulting firm that's a little less design, sprinkler fire alarm design focused than Telgen was, but still working on a lot of cool projects nonetheless.
Wow, what a ride! That's cool to hear about your journey. My one initial thought, being from Oklahoma, is that that's got to be a big culture shock going from the Boston, Massachusetts to Atlanta. I was just in Atlanta for a layover that ended up being way too long, like 24 hours in Atlanta. But yeah, that's a big geographical difference. Is one of my thoughts from your journey there.
Yeah, it was certainly interesting, and I never saw myself as somebody who was leaving Massachusetts. I grew up just south of Boston in the Plymouth County area, which is a really great place to grow up. But we just kind of got to the point, my wife and I, where we wanted to try something different. Worked out that Atlanta was a city where both of us could have a career opportunity on top of a personal move, and we love it here. So it's been we're going on 4 years here, no, 5 years here, um, and we've settled down. We bought a house. We're looking to raise a family. Got married, so can't see us leaving. But definitely a culture shock. Definitely a lot different from where we grew up, and the cold weather. No snow is certainly a plus,
Yeah,
but
yeah, for sure.
definitely different. Something that I tell people. We interview kids out of school and they're thinking about leaving, and they're thinking about trying to do a different office than the office we have for SLS in Boston. I tell them I think it's the greatest thing I've ever done, from just a learning experience. Putting yourself in a situation where you're meeting people with different backgrounds, different paradigms, different viewpoints to you from growing up, and not just being around the same pool of people all the time. I think it really helps you grow as a person, and opens doors to opportunities you didn't even know were there. So I highly recommend to anybody that's thinking about doing that, moving across the country to a different portion of the country, whatever it is. For me, I think it was one of the best decisions I've made, both professionally and personally.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I loved hearing about, how you, in the different phases of the different jobs you've held, you kind of oscillated between heavy, fire alarm sprinkler design and then more of a performance-based design and a little bit more of the classical engineering sense or fire protection engineering sense of work. Um, yeah, would you speak a little bit about that? Because it's interesting to me. I feel like these kind of performance-based design and this kind of engineering work is it's very niche, and only some buildings in large metropolitan, areas where it's more common. I mean, but you kind of grew up in your stomping grounds of probably a lot of buildings that were utilizing these engineering delivery or tools in order to find compliance. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about the performance-based design experience and that contrast.
Absolutely. So, I'll start off by saying that anytime we work on a project, the prescriptive route is always what we're pushing for, right? But I've always been very interested in alternatives and performance-based routes. One of the things I learned at Nfpa, and one of the things that was kind of drilled into us, was not that the codes and standards are necessarily, you know, always behind to the point that they're falling behind the times, but just the development process takes 3 years to update most of the major codes and standards, right? Like NFPA 101, NFPA 13 are on 3-year cycles. So every 3 years, those get updated. And there's a whole public process and comment process and committee process for putting new information into the code. And there has to be technical backing and testing and justifications for reasons why and things like that. So just inherently, there are going to be trends, solutions, technologies out there available for compliance or to meet levels of safety that aren't going to be prescriptive. And that always intrigued me. The ability to basically look at a situation and say, okay, we understand how this is supposed to work prescriptively. We understand what the intent of that prescriptive requirement is and what we're trying to meet. How do we do that in a different way? So Obviously design work from a fire alarm, fire sprinkler standpoint can be a lot more prescriptive. It's a lot more regimented. There's a lot of testing to back that up in terms of how we control fires and how we get people out of buildings. So there's not as much flexibility in conventional projects, I think, to pursue performance-based alternatives in the design work. But when it comes to the code stuff and looking at means of egress and looking at tenability and looking at smoke control and all these other complicated subjects, it just opens the door to a world of possibilities to meet certain goals, right? I think performance-based design, for me, and this is just kind of my outlook on it, I think has always been broken down into kind of three buckets, right? So there's the performance-based design you're using to fix a problem, right? There's something on site during construction or in the design that now is baked into the design and can't be changed that is an issue prescriptively and is causing issues to the design team, causing a headache for your owner, causing a headache for your architect clients that we need to solve. And it has to get creative because you going the prescriptive route means you need to redo the whole thing, and we're too late for that. The second bucket to me is meeting a unique design goal, right? A lot of the buildings that use performance-based design are pushing the envelope a little bit, not in terms of safety. Obviously, safety is paramount, but doing things that are cutting edge, doing things that are not necessarily always normal in the design industry, right? So you need to come up with a way to justify the ideas or the design goals that your clients have without jeopardizing life safety. And there's not a prescriptive way to do that. So we need to find a way to quantifiably or quantitatively justify that with some sort of analysis. And then the third is any time that you can save cost without reducing life safety, right? So when you get into the commercial world and you're working in, commercial projects, money is always an issue and cost is always an issue. I'm sure, anybody who listens to this podcast, and you, Gus, as well, working on your projects, or have had an owner ask you about cost, or what does this change cost, or what is this going to do to us? We need to make a decision. And sometimes performance-based design can be a solution that helps meet the owner's cost goals while still meeting your design intent goals as a fire protection engineer or an architect or whoever the project stakeholders are. So that always really interested me. So the opportunity to do some of that started early in my career in Boston, working on some train stations up there. We had to come up with a performance-based method for analyzing the egress. And for those of you that have used, Nfpa 130, it's all timing based. So it kind of pushes you into performance-based design anyways. So that was kind of my introduction to it. And then, coming to Telgen down here in Atlanta, being someone that had worked with performance-based design before, I was able to participate in some of the performance projects that they had, some unique challenges they had, both with their main clients and some new clients they're trying to procure. So I've always kind of been able to be in the room and soak it up and learn about that stuff. And now here at SLS, obviously, if we see an opportunity for something that we think can help the design or enhance the level of safety from a performance standpoint, it's always something we're looking at as an option in the projects we work on.
Man, that was great. I really enjoyed that, hearing the kind of different approaches or outlooks on performance-based design. Yeah, I think that it's great for, I bet a lot of the listeners to the podcast maybe don't have the same experience around the subject. So it's cool to hear about that and your experience. But yeah, so in your role now, what could you give an example of, like, and you don't have to get into like specifics of the project, but an example of some of the project work either you've worked on recently or within your career, is like to give people a little bit more of an illustration of the kind of jobs you're doing. Like, I know exactly what you're saying when you are talking about construction documents for fire, sprinkler and fire alarm, and some of these performance-based alternatives. But yeah, just if you could just give a little bit more details on the specifics of project work you've been involved with.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like we just said, we mentioned the fire alarm, fire sprinkler work. What we do a lot of here at SLS, and what I do a lot at my company in Boston as well, is general code consulting, right? So we're working with the architect The pitch that I always give when I'm talking to architect clients is that, we're trying to design this amazing structure, this skyline defining structure sometimes for taller buildings, right? And there's a lot of detail that goes into that from a code standpoint to make sure people are safe, whether it's where rated walls are, what types of walls are, continuity of construction materials, fire resistance rating, construction materials, means of egress, what systems they need. Maybe not necessarily the design, but sometimes, there's unique challenges like data rooms and things like that, where the design team might not even be thinking about what kind of system they need or what smoke control systems they need, things like that. So we try to come in from a code standpoint and help our clients deliver a safe, compliant building while meeting their goals from a prescriptive standpoint. And that can fall under things like, code interpretations, that can fall under actually reaching out to Nfpa and ICC to obtain interpretations, that can fall under performance-based design if it's something unique. And then that can fall into just general guidance on prescriptive compliance. A lot of people, I think, look at building and fire codes and you read them and they seem very black and white. But then when you get into the actual project work, there's a lot of gray area. And we try to help our clients navigate that gray area in a safe manner. For example, this is actually kind of the perfect example for how it is a gray area. Robert Solomon works for our company. Robert's a great mentor and an awesome person that I met at NFPA, who used to oversee the buildings and standards division there. He retired and he came to actually work for us, which has been an awesome resource for us for training, for educational purposes. Robert's just a wealth of knowledge. But when he came on board after being at NFPA for 30 years, he kind of said to us, wow, I didn't realize how much gray area there is when it comes to an actual project and how things are being interpreted. And so that kind of speaks, I think, to the fact that a code consultant is necessary in a lot of different aspects, just because not everything is, read the book and do what the book says. It's how is the book being applied? What is the intent of that? And how are we meeting our design goals that way? And then that helps you figure out when do we need to go down that performance route. But from a project standpoint, we work on a lot of high-rise buildings. Those get very complicated from a code standpoint. We do a lot of smoke control system rational analysis design, so modeling of smoke control systems to size stair press, elevator press, atrium systems. Atrium systems are kind of the classic example of a performance-based design, right? Because when you calculate a system to NFPA 92 and you use the hand calcs and it gives you a number, a lot of times, not every time, there's always exceptions to the rule, but a lot of times when you run an FDS model combined with a Pathfinder egress model to size your atrium system, you actually can end up reducing the size of the fans, right? Which is a space saver, a cost saver, then a more efficient way to provide life safety, as long as you've done your due diligence and put in the maintain the level of safety. So that's kind of a classic example. We do a lot of those. So we work on a lot of commercial high-rise projects, a lot of multifamily, a lot of mixed use, even some low-rise projects. What's really popular right now are those, low-rise 7-story, 6-story buildings that are podium construction, which is like a concrete base with a wood frame construction on top of it. Those are really complicated because of some unique code challenges we need to work through. So from a project standpoint, I think that's kind of a good overview of like what we're doing on top of, the unique stuff, some performance-based stuff, some design stuff, some general sprinkler design stuff. But from a performance-based design standpoint, 'cause I know that's kind of one of the things you wanted to talk about, Gus. I can't always give specifics on the project type, but some examples of some performance-based design things we've done. This project completed and out there, so we can say it. We did the atrium smoke control design modeling, and we were able to be the special inspector and test the system at the PGA Tour's global headquarters down in Ponte Vedra, Florida. That was a really cool project. Foster and Partners Architects was involved, which was super cool to work with. But that was a great example of using performance-based design to help size an atrium smoke control system. We have some other projects, a lot of historic preservation projects where performance-based design comes into play. Right now we have one structure that is a high-rise office building being converted into a residential building that's 100-something years old, and it has a 17-story atrium in the middle, and the historic facade in the atrium is the actual piece we're trying to preserve. So how do you put smoke control in a 100-year-old atrium that you have to maintain the atrium's facade for historical purposes? Well, we have to go through, and we're working through that challenge right now of, one, do we need it based on the model and the actual results of the model? Two, if we do need it, how we provide that. So just I think that's a pretty good example of how we implement that concept of performance-based design into our projects.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. Good to hear about the different kinds of project work. Yeah, I don't have as much experience like selling the code consulting, although I've been in a new role for about 6 months now and doing a little bit more code consulting, but that's interesting. Cool to hear you and how you have been able to market and kind of sell that. That's interesting. But also something that I loved was the gray area, because it seems like, it's one of the really essential skills of a fire protection engineer is how to navigate this gray area, how to reach out to NFPA and ICC for code interpretation. So really good to hear you speak about that even people who are, for nearly 40 years in the business are still struggling with those gray areas in the code. I know at the firm that I work at, like we'll get into, debates over whatever it is, exterior projections or something that's just sticky and niche and a super big gray area in the code. And, you have to be able to provide a solution within a reasonable time frame to a client. So it's a big challenge. So
Yeah, I think the gray area is a really good thing to talk about, maybe expound upon a little bit, right? I think it's kind of the crux of what we do and where we provide the value, right? I mean, one of the big things I learned coming from the market in Massachusetts to the market in Atlanta. So Massachusetts is one of those places that has, WPI is right there. It's very similar to a University of Maryland or the West Coast with Cal Poly, or even Gus. I know you're from Oklahoma, so Oklahoma State's fire science group. There's it's a concentration of fire protection engineers there. Atlanta's a kind of a migration city, so there's a lot of different people from different backgrounds here, but there's not a school that produces fire protection engineers. The closest one would be Maryland. So there's a concentration of engineers that have moved here, but not necessarily people that grew up here, went to school here, and built an industry here. So I was very surprised coming from Boston, where I mean, even the simplest of projects, no project's simple, but in terms of comparing, a 40-story building to a 5-story building, had a code consultant. The architects saw the value in it. They wanted them. Boston Fire Department was very active in advocating for what we do as an industry. And coming to Atlanta, not that the design, uh, quality is any lower or anything. I think the design quality here is very, very high from a city standpoint. But the architects here had never had the opportunity. Some of them had, some of them hadn't really had the opportunity to work with someone in our industry. So it was really interesting, just paradigm wise, coming from a situation where when you're talking to architects, they know who you are, they know what you do, and they know why you need you. And coming to Atlanta, they see the value in what you do, but they've never used someone like you before. They've never had to have that service on their team. They've never seen the value you provided. So highlighting the gray areas, taking it back to where we started, was super important. And kind of understanding the pain points that they run into on their projects, big or small, and how can we help solve those? And do we do that, through our own experience? Do we do that through reaching to outside help? Do we do that through quantitative analysis? Do we do that through modeling? Do we do that through looking at alternatives, things like that? So a lot of it is, the gray area is extremely important, because that's where, I think a lot of the problems arise from a code standpoint when you go through review processes. And like you said, you have these arguments in your own office, or you have these discussions in your own office about, how do I apply this? Does this really apply here? Does this fit into the mold of what the code is trying to tell us? And then you have to have those same conversations with your AHJs, your authorities having jurisdiction, whether it's the building official, the fire official, the insurance official, the local, for higher ed projects, the actual like higher ed campus director from a facility standpoint. There's a lot of stakeholders that, as you said, Gus, can all have different opinions. And I think that's where we as an industry provide, on the code side, a lot of value to projects, because we can help navigate those, and we speak that language. We speak the same language as a fire department official, and can have a spirited conversation about how this is being applied, and try to, come to common ground on what level of safety we're providing.
yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Yeah, where the big value. That's a great way to I say selling it, but really it's just highlighting the importance of it. Too frequently, as somebody that comes from a jurisdiction like Oklahoma is a place where the code consultant or a lot of full service firms like architecture and engineering firms are not using um, fire protection consulting or life safety consulting. They might have architects doing the life safety work, or maybe some in house fire protection to a limited degree, but it's fairly common here, even with Oklahoma State having their program so close that it's not baked into the model here as well. So I know what you're saying. How Atlanta, it's a bit of a different culture as far as the design industry. So cool to hear you talk about that contrast. But I wanted to ask you about um, some of your professional society involvement and if you had had a chance to get involved with some of the ones that are fairly common.
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to coming to SLS, I did the basics, right? I was a member of SFPE, a member of NFPA, and just try to get involved as I could. Since joining SLS and being in more of a position that's client facing and forward facing, I've had more opportunities to get involved, which has been super awesome because that's something that I've always felt passionate about. I think that I don't necessarily want to call it giving back because it's more just being involved in the industry and trying to help push the industry forward. So I've always wanted to do that. That's always been a goal of mine since working at NFPA and seeing all these amazing people that are part of those standards committees. So I've had the opportunity to apply and be accepted and approved to the NFPA 1 Hazmat Committee. So I'm on that standards development committee. I'm the principal member, and then we just appointed one of our alternates here, which is a great way to get involved too. For those listening, if you have a chance to be somebody's alternate, and even though you don't really hold a lot of responsibility, but be somebody's alternate and see the process and see how it works and put your name in the system, that I think it helps your opportunity of becoming a principal member on one of these boards. We lucked into, NFPA 1 2 years ago split into 3 subcommittees. So there was a rush for people needed. And there was an opportunity. So I applied on a whim and was able to become a part of that standards committee, which has been really, really rewarding and really something that I've really enjoyed. I also got involved with SFPE quite a bit more. So we're on a couple committees trying to help write technical guides for certain things, as well as just, helping membership and outreach locally. Atlanta, the Greater Atlanta chapter, does a really cool conference. If any of you have the time to check it out, it's in March of next year. I can certainly get the details out, but it's a really cool local conference that actually is one of the larger local conferences behind the national conference that SFPE puts on. And so I've been able to help get involved with developing that conference and helping find speakers and kind of being part of that committee that brings that to life. And then recently, my 2 newest ventures, I'm joining the NCES board that helps develop the PE exam. I have not been to a single meeting yet because I think the first one's in late September. So I'm excited to go to my first one and see what that's all about. But that's something that I feel really passionate about. I think that exam is kind of the litmus test of how qualified you need to be to consider yourself a professional engineer and somebody who can take responsibility for work and projects in the industry. So I think that's a really important thing and something I'm really excited about joining. And then I just joined the Council for Tall Buildings and Urban Habitats Life Safety Committee. And again, that's when my first meeting will be in November, but I've been appointed. So we'll see what that's like, what kind of work they're doing. I'm familiar with some of their stuff from an architecture side and the highlighting they do of projects around the country and outreach, but it'll be really interesting to see what they do from a life safety side and kind of be part of those discussions.
Very cool. Sounds like you're keeping your finger on the pulse of the industry and keeping in touch. That's neat to hear about the local conference. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, if you get a chance to come check it out, it's March. It's in March every year. I'm trying to think of the dates this year. I'll get them, Gus. I can text them over to
Oh,
you.
okay. Yeah, not a
But it's
problem.
a super cool conference. We We do it local. It doesn't conflict with the national conference. They're usually about 6 months apart. It's a great way to get CEUs. A lot of fire officials come, a lot of AHJs come, a lot of engineers in the local markets come. And it's the Greater Atlanta Conference. So it actually includes places like Nashville, the Carolinas, Northern Florida. Anybody really within reach can come. We're in the programming phase right now. I think we're going to have some cool speakers lined up. A lot of cool topics. Last year we did something on mass timber. We had one of the guys that was involved in the mass timber testing come in and explain to us how the mass timber construction works in 2021 IBC. We did some stuff on existing buildings last year, which are always a challenge, especially in states where Nfpa and the International Existing Building Code kind of butt heads. I think it's a really valuable thing, and certainly anybody that's interested in coming, it would be worth your while.
For sure, yeah, definitely always a good idea to get out, speak with people in person, make connections, collaborate, talk about all these projects and this, all the similar problems that everybody is having. So it's a good plug. Um, but yeah, on the topic of resources, I like to ask everybody, but so how do you like, barring the professional societies and the magnificent connections you've made through your career and kind of the your college that you in the program that you've been a part of, how do you stay informed on the industry? What kind of resources or trade magazines or where do you get your information about how the industry is changing?
NFPA Journal is a great way to learn big picture things. SFPE also has a publication that's very similar. If you follow any of them on LinkedIn, you'll see articles on NFPA Connect, SFP, I think SFP, or NFPA Link and SFP Connect. I always mix those two up. They're also really good resources. On top of that, though, these conferences are great ways to learn, right? The conferences are designed around bringing speakers in who talk about new topics or the trade show portion of it. Like at NFPA, they always have the floor of, trade partners. And those trade partners are there to show you their cutting edge technology, and just going around and learning about that. You never know when you might use something. For example, we were doing a foam sprinkler design for a smaller private aircraft hangar in Florida. And we met I forget the name of the company now, but the trench drain company, the flammable liquids trench drain company, at NFPA. And we took their card and we learned about their system, and we were able to immediately go back to our owner and say, hey, we met these people. This is all accredited. It's tested. It's a really awesome way to do this without having to use necessarily the foam and worry about accidental discharge. And we're in conversations right now about how that project's going to go from a design standpoint, whether it's going to use the flammable liquid floor drainage system or continue with an active system. But that's just one way to highlight, you make a connection, you meet somebody that has this new technology, and you're able to then implement that. So the trade shows, I think, are an amazing way to do that. If you get a chance to go to NFPA, or you get a chance to go to your local SFP, if they have any sort of conferences or any sort of weekly luncheons. I know ours does, for a portion of the year, they do a monthly luncheon where they bring in someone in the industry who's working on something that maybe is a little bit cutting edge or a little bit outside the normal realm of what people use from a product standpoint, and let them kind of do a lunch and learn on what their product is and what it does. And that's just a great way to understand what's going on, what's out there, and maybe potentially how you can use it to help your clients or your projects in the future.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think it's Safe Spill is the name of that company. But oh yeah, my firm does a lot of hanger work, so the consternation around foam has been something that's been felt. It seems like the waves of it just keep coming. We do a lot of military work too, so the sundown policy and a lot of the different adjustments that are made. Sorry, I had to clear my throat. But the adjustments that the government is still making for how to deal with getting away from foam. So it's interesting. It'd be neat to hear if you guys end up going through with the safe spill flooring, because it's a little bit more of an unknown. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. It's great that it's listed, and if you are looking for the solution that will guarantee that you don't have an inadvertent discharge, then I think it definitely has value.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's definitely something that we're in the investigation phase on, right? It's not something that we're saying we're going to implement right now, but I think it's just a cool example of being able to meet someone at a conference and be able to potentially apply their product. We'll
Yeah,
see. We'll
that's
see what
awesome.
happens there.
For sure. Yeah. So, what kind of trends do you see in the industry right now? It sounds like you're in a lot of interesting occupancy niches like high rise construction and performance based design. What are you seeing right now as kind of popping up?
I mean, obviously, multifamily projects are the name of the game right now, right? With I know the economy's starting to turn a little bit, so hopefully they stay hot and we still continue to build. But for a while there just wasn't enough inventory in the housing market, so uh, the multifamily industry becomes super important. Whether that's low rise, it's high rise, it's whatever it is. We're building apartments at an astounding rate right now. Um, on top of that, I know I've seen some stuff from a housing standpoint, and I'm not sure how fire protection fits into it yet, but some companies are actually starting to build developments of single family homes and rent those out similar to apartments or rent to own. And a lot of the major apartment developers are starting to do that. And that's an interesting one because typically, from a fire protection standpoint, you don't always get involved in single family homes, right? The sprinkler requirements, there's not a ton of them. I don't think any states have officially adopted the home fire sprinkler requirements in the IRC that both the ICC and NFPA are really pushing forward from a safety standpoint. But when people move to the single family home, it's trying to find a way that we can help those projects. On top of that, I mean, we're seeing things, um, in the performance based design side of things. I think there's more wiggle room being built into the codes to use scientific and testing data and explanations of qualitative data. I know NFPA 101 has, and this was a couple of years ago now, and this isn't new, but they have that chapter 5 now that's all about performance based design. Um, the ICC continues to push the alternative means and methods request option and route for performance based design. So I think it's becoming more and more abundantly clear that it's an option to design teams and something that is being more and more widely accepted. Whether it has a third party peer review or doesn't, that's another trend we're seeing. A lot of third party peer reviews on modeling, which I think is great for the industry because we don't want to blindly accept a model. It's such a complicated tool that on top of your internal checks and QAQC and things like that, it's a really good idea to have a third party look at it if you can, or if the project warrants it. I think that's kind of it. I mean, there's other stuff too, but some of our clients have got us under NDAs, and I can't talk about some of the things we're working on. But
Sure, sure.
as
No
always,
pressure.
sprinklers are being pushed forward all the time, right? I mean, the more you can sprinkler a building, the more safe it's going to be. And some of these alternative suppression things, like the safe spill system, are certainly super interesting. I think this might be old news too. I know Viking was starting to work on some sprinkler K factors that were greater than 25. So that'll be interesting for storage applications. The automated storage and retrieval stuff is of course super interesting. I think there's a lot of different directions the industry is going in different portions of our industry, right? Whether it's storage, whether it's occupancy driven, whether it's um, healthcare driven. I know in healthcare, NFPA 101 just increased the smoke compartment limit in the 2018 edition from 22,500 square feet to I think 40,000 in some cases.
Hmm.
But the Joint Commission is still using the 2012, so I think we're going to see some interesting conversations there about why did we increase to 40,000 and why are we being held to the lower standard, but at the same time that's what the Joint Commission is enforcing for publicly funded healthcare projects. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch. Like there's just a lot of different things going on. I think it's a really exciting time to be part of our industry.
Man, yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of stuff going on, and I know that's kind of a hard question. Some of these are super open-ended on like just what's going on, but really, I think anything that you're seeing is valuable for people to hear about, and kind of just a chance to talk about it. But yeah, I think to round out the interview, and other than, of course, we could talk about anything you'd like, but what piece of advice would you have for somebody who is, I guess it could be any professional. You don't have to tailor it to a specific portion of experience. But in my mind, this question is geared towards I have somebody who he's a bit of a mentor to, and they're asking me like, how do I learn more about the industry, or what's a good way to, buff up on your fire and life safety skills. But what piece of advice would you give somebody like that?
So I think the best advice I ever got professionally was while I was at Nfpa. One of the mentors I had there told me, when you get into the consulting world or the working world and you're given an opportunity to work on something, just don't say no, right? And I'm going to say there's caveats to that, right? I mean, obviously, if it's something that you just don't feel comfortable with from a technical standpoint, or it's you obviously there's a work-life balance you need to strike. You don't want to be working 80 hours a week. But I think that advice has served me really well, right? I think when you are confident in the training you've gotten from a university standpoint and you're confident in your own ability to figure things out, I think that's one of the things that WPI teaches us really well is, in the real world, you have to be proactive to figure things out. You're not just going to be handed a book that tells you where it is. You're not just going to be told where to look in a chapter from a class standpoint. You're really encouraged to almost teach yourself on top of what the teachers and the professors are teaching you. And I think if you're confident in your ability to do that, kind of the mentality of, I will figure this out. I'll spend the extra time doing the research. I will make sure that I'm, as prepared for what I'm being asked to do as I can be. Then, not saying no to something that might be outside of your comfort zone can really help progress your career and can really help you get involved in things you didn't think you would, right? I know for my own personal example, right? I mean, I was doing code consulting in Boston and I was a code consultant and that was what I did. And then I got the opportunity to get out and test a smoke control system. And at that point in my career, smoke control systems were, only talked about in my classes at WPI. I'd never actually seen one work. I didn't know anything about it. And to get out with a team of two other engineers who taught me a lot, as well as, seeing it work in person, was something that, I wasn't super comfortable with at first, but something that I think served me really well in terms of understanding how they work and seeing how they work and having the opportunity to do that. And then that transitioned into the opportunity to do some commissioning work. And like I said earlier, I was kind of the grunt of the group, right? I was the one running around pulling levers, being told what to do. But, I was a chemical engineer in undergrad and a fire protection engineering master's degree and started out in a code space. I had no idea how mechanical systems worked. I had no idea how electrical systems worked. I mean, I knew they kept you cool. I knew that they got you power, but I didn't know how they worked. And that was really uncomfortable for me to jump into that space because that's not even what I'm degreed in, right? I wasn't a mechanical engineer by trade. I wasn't an electrical engineer by trade. I had no previous experience, but jumping in and trusting yourself to figure it out and learning that and just not saying no was an awesome way to learn that. And I think it has really helped me from a well-rounded consultant standpoint, learning some of that stuff that's even fire protection adjacent. So, to sum that out, I think the best advice that I can give professionally, and, I'm still young in my professional career, so maybe this will change over time. But for me right now, it's just don't say no. You have the confidence and the ability to figure out what's being put in front of you and don't necessarily turn and run at the first sign of uncomfortability.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. I've had a lot of good things come out of saying yes to work that I didn't really know how to do yet. So it's okay to not know all the steps in the process, and growing as a professional or becoming a professional that is competent. You just know that you know all the steps to figure out the answers. You don't ever know all the steps of every problem. So I think that's a great piece of advice, John. Well, yeah, I didn't think that unless you have a topic you'd like to talk about, that's a good way to end it, John. Do you have any more thoughts or any things that you'd like to bring up?
No, I think this has been great, man. I really appreciate you having me on, and thought it was an awesome conversation. Always love talking to industry people. I think it's super, super cool to, talk to other people in the industry, see what you're doing, see what you're seeing, and learn and kind of learn by osmosis, just talking to you and having a conversation. So this has been great, and really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. You did great, and really enjoyed the conversation. I think people will love it. So, yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to share the episode with a friend if you enjoyed it. Don't forget that fire protection and life safety is serious business. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are by no means a professional consultation or a codes and standards interpretation. Be sure to contact a licensed professional if you are getting involved with fire protection and or life safety. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.